Hey y'all, so today we're going to be making a bottle holder, but whereas I usually get right into it, today I want to talk about some other design aspects or how to approach product design. But if you're here because you purchased a pattern, of course you can just skip right into the time step and get right into it. But in case you're curious, I think this is a great example where you can maybe learn a thing or two on how to approach your leather products, especially if you want to sell them. So I've been meaning to do a bottle holder for quite some time. Mainly because as an avid coffee drinker, I do need one myself, but also because I think it's a nice add-on for people to buy, for example, if they have a bag or something and they want something on top of it. But that also already brings me to my first point. A bottle holder is not something like a standout piece, like a bag or something. So people don't want to spend too much money on this, and this is something we need to take into account. And when we talk about the price of leather items, the main 2 points that come into play are labor and material. And so first, to start off with labor, especially for many leather crafters like us that like to stitch things by hand, that does take a lot of time. And it's not always necessary, right? Especially recently, I've been into a lot of no sewing builds, and I did want to continue this. So this will be our first design constraint. And the second point is, of course, material. We all know leather is really expensive. But another point to consider is that if we have highly irregular shapes, for example, we also have a lot of cutoff, which is also waste and we need to take into account. So based on that, our second design constraint, I would say, is stick to regular shapes, because we can cut these really efficiently. And for people like me, another good thing on top of is I already have a lot of leftover pieces. So if I can just reuse them, I can finally get rid of all of this. And that also makes my leather usage much more efficient. Okay, so now we already have some pointers on design and cost and some constraints that we can use to see how we can make our design fit these constraints. And now we covered our design constraints that we got from labor and material, but of course there's still the functionality of the actual item. So what is it that we want this bottle holder to have in order for it to be a good product? And for me, one thing was certainly it needs to be attachable, because otherwise I don't see how or why I would use this in the first place. So I would say this is a rather obvious one, but the second one I wanted to for myself is, especially for coffee, I would like it to have a handle, because then I can drink much more easily. And it's something I wanted to test out. Okay, so now we have 4 design constraints that we want to work with. And at this point, I'll probably just lock myself in a room for an hour or two and see what I can up with. And this is the result. And let me show you 1 or 2 more features in detail and how I achieved it. Okay, so first let me take out the bottle so I can show you more easily. So first, as we said, we want to stick to basic shapes. So strips is a very intuitive thing to do, but then we also get the problem, how do we properly bind or attach them to each other without putting in too much effort, like sewing them all together? And what I came up with is this interlocking mechanism. Okay, so let me show you the mechanism with some leftover pieces. So we can add a rectangle ring this way, and then we can wrap it around. And that already gives us a good lock in this direction. But now we have the problem, it can still run off in this direction if we pull too hard. And especially something like a bottle holder, that should not be something you need to worry about. Okay, but so then what if we add another piece that locks it in the different direction and you also can't pull it out anymore? So for that, let me disassemble this again. So then we first put this piece through, and now we add our strips for the horizontal direction, and now we already have the piece locked in both directions so that forces can pull in both this and this direction. Now the only problem is these things of course could still come undone this way, but as we said in the beginning, we wanted to add a handle anyway. So if now we put our handle through here, it's also locked again in this direction, from top and from bottom. So no matter in what direction you pull, this will always be locked. And it also fits our idea that we want to keep our labor cost to a minimum. And this, for example, is much faster than if we would have to stitch together all those different items. Then, once we got our basic idea out of the way, we just need to do some details, like the rounded corners so everything looks a bit more sophisticated. And of course, calculate all the necessary measurements in terms of height, diameters, and so on that we want to. I hope this was interesting for you to get maybe a little bit more insights into the product design and how to approach things, especially if you want to sell your items. And if you want to see more like that in the future, let me know. But now then, finally, as usual, without any further ado, let's actually get into making this, right? I'm gonna start with some black Butero that I have lying around, and this one is around 4 to 5 ounces. And we will need 4 strips overall. So first I'll cut the big one, mark all my necessary points that we will need to punch later, and then just cut out all of them. And I have cut them as complete rectangles because I find that a little bit easier. But then now I'm gonna take off the edges. And here my board has 1/2 centimeter squares, so I can just line it up and then cut off on a 40-degree angle. And next up, as with every good leather project, we will need to bevel and burnish all of our edges. Now when we start punching the holes, I will double check the diameter of my rectangle ring and make sure my hole punch is the same size. Then I will use this to punch the holes on all of our straps. If you have rectangle rings that are a little bit thicker or thinner, you can adjust it accordingly. Then only watch out that you use the appropriate hole punch for the rivets. Then I cut the connection between the holes we just punched, so we can put our rectangle ring through them later on. Then I'll just quickly double check if the rectangle ring fits well and that there's no tension or any Then on our wider strip we also want to cut off here on the sides so that our rectangle ring can enter the holes from the sides. Then we can already get started with our assembly. So first I will take the smaller strips on our large one and secure it with 2 rivets. After we've secured the rivets, then on the other side we want to start with our rectangle rings and first put in the lower one, and you will need to bend the leather a little bit here to get it through. And once these are in place, we can take our side straps from the sides and put them over the rectangle rings. Then, to make sure this stays in place as well, we add our last strap, which will form our handle, and first secure it on the bottom with one of the rivets. And once that is in place, we can also put it through the other end. Then here I will be adding our swivel hook and then secure it with another rivet. And that already concludes our build for today. So as always, I do hope you liked it. If you did, consider leaving a like, commenting, or even subscribing if you want to see more. And let me know down in the comments what you thought about my tangent. And with that, I would say, see you next time.